In the late 90s, it was felt that the body in charge of R&D and marketing for the red meat industry was not working, and Minister Anderson oversaw a review, and MLA came into existence. This diagram shows Australian Meat and Livestock Corporation, AMLC, being funded by a statutory slaughter levy, collected from processors and producers alike. By 1998, the income of AMLC was $76 million and being used for marketing and R&D. In 1998, Meat and Livestock Australia, MLA, was formed, funded mainly by a statutory transaction levy on all transaction of livestock. This chart shows how the processors and live exporters were given their own service company and can make any contribution they desire. This gives processors and live exporters control over their R&D and marketing. On this chart, you can see processors and live exporters in the black funded by a compulsory levy. You can also see MLA, service provider for the grass-fed cattle sector, being funded by a compulsory transaction levy. In the bottom chart, you can see Ozmeat controlling things like how much trim. Ozmeat has a board of 4 and a language and standards committee dominated by processors and retailers. The question has to be posed: who are the biggest voters at the MLA AGM? Correspondence from MLA suggests this is private and they will not release the names and any voting rights of any members. In 2012, it was suggested a processor and a large producer company were the biggest levy payers. If indeed this is true, then processors may have control of not only their own service company, but that of producers as well. Cattle Council of Australia, Producers Peak Council, who supposedly represent their interests, appears to be broke and ineffectual and doesn't normally give an annual report. However, in 2019, they published a report which clearly showed an income of $2.1 million. MLA, which has an uncontested service agreement with CCA, contributed $1.2 million, which is over 50% of CCA's income. This would appear to compromise CCA and rule out any oversight of MLA. We are told MLA is a producer-owned company in charge of R&D and marketing. Grass-fed cattle producers pay $60 million without any oversight or any agreement on how that money is spent. MLA have a selection committee to choose directors. Those positions for the selection panel are voted for at the MLA AGM, and these selectors select applicants to go on the board. They only select the same number of candidates as there are board vacancies. This means that if there are 3 vacancies, there are 3 candidates, 1 for each position. Most people believe this is a sham and hardly a democratic vote. The power processors can yield over MLA is very interesting. At one stage, we saw 3 processors sitting on the board as directors. This is supposedly a producer-owned company, and one could be excused for wondering how much power the processors have over MLA. In 2006, MLA went around the country with forums to raise the levy from $3.50 to $5. One of the reasons was to fund extra marketing to keep the consumption of beef from falling on the domestic market. Consequently, spending went from $8 million per year to $18 million per year with little success, as the consumption of beef has declined from 40 kilograms per capita in 1998 down to 18.2 kilograms presently. Many of MLA projects have failed. Members were told in 1998 MSA was going to stop the home consumption of beef falling. However, by 2004, the whole system was falling apart as processors and retailers would not adopt it. The whole system was simply too good. Finally, the rules were watered down and took all of the foundations away from a great system. Home consumption of beef continued to decline. Another example, in 2016, MLA Managing Director Richard Norton announced at the MLA AGM that MLA would spend $150 million on beef extra. The technology was going to be implemented at all Ozmeat plants around Australia. No business plan, just a leap into the unknown. This technology appears to have failed. Surely this shows there is no oversight of MLA. Australian Meat Industry Council, AMIC, in contrast to CCA, is well funded and has an income of $4.6 million and has $20 million in retained earnings. It is interesting to note that the biggest processors in the country are not members, and they prefer to do their own lobbying. Australian Meat Processors Council, AMPC, is totally owned by processors for the benefit of processors, and when compared with MLA, are more transparent, with their R&D clearly documented in their annual report. In 2014, the Senate inquiry made 7 recommendations gleaned from the thoughts of approximately 500 interested producers through submissions, from letters and questionnaires. One of the recommendations was that processor levies should be classed as slaughter levies, and any levies collected goes through the AMPC. Many producers feel that if the 7 recommendations had been adopted, grass-fed cattle producers would have a transparent, accountable and democratic structure.